Well, it's finally time for today's Ask Away, and I just have to say, thank you, thank you, thank you. We've been encouraging you to engage with our speakers all day, and you've more than risen to the challenge. Your questions have been pouring in, and our team has been hard at work compiling them so that we can put them to our fantastic speakers in real time. If yesterday's Ask Away is anything to go by, I know we're in for some profound answers. But first, you've been sharing your thoughts by voting in our live polls. So let's take a quick look at the results. The first was more of a knowledge question. We asked, what is the number of girls worldwide not enrolled in formal education? And your options, none of which were particularly hopeful, were A, 80 million, B, 105 million, and C, 130 million. The correct answer, sadly, is C. Nearly 130 million girls around the world aren't getting a formal education. And we know that will only lead to more and greater obstacles for them down the road. But there are so many barriers facing girls, women, and all genders. So in our second poll, we asked, beyond education, what do you think is the biggest challenge to achieving gender equality? 21% of you said it was the absence of legislation, regulations, and enforcement. 21% chose a lack of economic justice and opportunities. 56% of you thought cultural norms and traditions are the biggest problem, and 2% told us that individual inaction posed the biggest challenge to gender equality. That's fascinating. For more than half of you, it's cultural norms and traditions, these old mindsets, that are holding us back on gender equality and inclusion, which actually feels really encouraging because that's something we can change, something that we are changing, literally, as we speak. Finally, for poll number 3, we had to know, how are you contributing to achieving gender equality? And we heard you loud and clear. 30% of you said you were informing yourselves and spreading awareness. 27% are being an ally to women and people of all genders. 31% support companies and civil society organizations working on gender equality. And 12% are demanding laws and regulations to end discrimination. Obviously, we all need to be doing all of these things. And it's interesting that you are almost even across all the options, except for demanding laws and regulations. I wonder if that means you're less focused on that or that you feel less empowered to make change in that space. Either way, seems like that's a key area that we and our governments and elected officials could pay some attention. So as always, lots of work to do, but truly, we so appreciate you taking these polls. And now let's get to our Ask Away. Speakers, thank you for joining us again. I'll be calling on each of you directly, so get ready. And as always with Ask Away, it'd be great if you could keep your answers tight, especially today because there are so many of you, so we can get through as many questions as possible. So first up, and I'm going to consult my trusty iPad here, we have a question for Anbid Zaman, the co-chair of Global Queer Youth Network, who was with us in the opening plenary. Anbid, this question comes from Oscar Noel in Ireland. And Oscar asks, with the rise of anti-trans and anti-gender movements, how does intersectional joy support the fight for equality? And I might actually just add a little follow on here. How does all of that square with the violent, even deadly attacks against the LGBTQ+ community? Are you ever scared being an activist or yearning for a quiet life?
Thank you very much for the question, especially thanks to Oscar Noel being a wonderful ally, but also a great team member for the Global Queer Youth Network.
Oh, you know Oscar.
Well, yeah, I'm very happy that Oscar asked this question because this is very pressing for the movement. I mean, LGBTI community globally are no stranger to criminalization, no stranger to unjust, like we face unjust every single day. Discrimination, violence, you know, even sometimes people are being killed when they are discovered to be something or someone else than the idea the person had. I think it's really important that we see human as not a reproductive tool or a sexual object. We see people as the potential for our future progress together. We invest and we value the diversity of different ideas, different dreams, drives, and also potential that they bring in our communities. In the anti-trans or non-binary movement, I must say that what we are seeing right now, also from the feminist movement, is how female individuals were fighting for their rights long ago and how men acted towards them, being like, we are fighting for the same issues, like self-determination, health, body, and all of that. And it's really important to not repeat the same mistake and the same flaw that feminist movement faced before and do it to other. And I think, as I talked about also as well today morning at the plenary, that we cannot go forward. A progress alone is not a progress for all. And we are fighting for the people and for the planet. And that will happen only when we collaboratively think and reimagine our community spaces, reimagine our politics, our culture, and find belonging for each other.
And of course, that's why intersectional joy is this beautiful framing, because it puts us in that mindset of learning the lessons and actually moving the ball forward, so to speak, on all of these issues for everyone involved. Thank you so much, Anbid. Our next question is for Amange Sinkoto, who's the co-founder of Blackboard Africa and was in our closing plenary. You're very active on social media and said that you use it to be an amplifier of your work. However, sometimes bad things spread just as far or farther on social media. How do we ensure that people spreading new ideas on social media create more good than harm? Amange?
I think the reality is that social media is the best and the worst of our societies. So I think on one hand, there's some really positive work that can be done in that space, but equally, there's some really negative things happening in our world. So that's always going to translate into that space. I think the approach that I've just tried to use is focusing on the work. So like I'm saying, social media has very much been an amplifier. It's not the entirety of my sort of my social mechanisms, my mechanisms for achieving justice and towards creating the world that I want to see. And so I think when I think of it like that, it's impactful and it's very influential, but it's not the be all and end all of my work. It will continue and does continue outside of any negative, commentary that might be happening on social media.
I do have to ask on behalf of this questioner, though, then how do you insulate yourself from it? Because it's so hard for us, especially these days, to block these messages out sometimes.
I think just try to focus, the streams of what you're putting out there. So if you're creating a platform that's, specifically about your business, about your initiative, about, your actual solution, keep it centered around that. And usually that should filter out a lot of the noise. Again, I think speaking to, as we're talking about, the multidimensionality of it, you also, there is space to have fun on social media and enjoy yourself, but, also be aware that the more you put out there, the more that you're opening yourself to. So if you really aren't, prepared for that, rather keep it private, keep it with your friends, your family, the people that you trust, and then make the public spaces for the actual action and the impact that you want to make.
Make it work for you and for what you care about. Thank you for that. Our next question is for Martin Karajov, who is a board member of and chair of the Youth Steering Committee at ILGA World, and comes from our In Conversation Creating Change. Came from our closing plenary. Too much on the iPad right now. Martin, this came from Erin Marr, also in Ireland. Do you think the mainstreaming of gender in the SDGs overlooks those that do not adhere to the binary? How do we ensure that the achievement of the SDGs is inclusive of all genders?
I think that's a great question, and thanks Erin for asking this one. I think yes, it's the short answer. I do think gender diverse people and non-binary people, gender non-conforming people are overlooked in the SDG agenda. I think it is critical for us to really look at those issues of particularly around inequalities of gender diverse people and trans people that are integral part of the gender equality conversation. And I often say this, that there's no way we can have a queer liberation without proper gender justice and vice versa. And also we can't have climate justice, we can't have educational equality without having queer liberation and gender equity and justice. They're all deeply interlinked and tied in with each other. But it's also important for us to look at toxic gender constructs and how they're formulated. So that's why it's critical for us to also look into Across the SDGs, LGBTIQ people are not specifically mentioned, but we know that we're impacted by all the targets that we've set to achieve, and our issues are there. Human rights are integral for the SDGs. So important for us to look into working with young men and boys as well. It's critical to deconstruct this toxic masculinity construct that are driving our world right now, including our notion of power that is driven and set by toxic masculinity. We need to redefine that. We need to look at how really our world is set by our leadership, that power that means caring, that means more empathy, solidarity, and it's not driven by a masculinity construct that are really harmful for not only our population, for our environment, and from everyone else. And when we have that in young men and boys, that their masculinity can be anything and it's not static, then we have so many more opportunities open to us and a world that is more just for everybody.
Yes, underscore italics bold, yes. I have to ask though, what's the best way for us to actually advance that bit of the agenda? Because as you say, we're not seeing it in conversation, and it's only becoming something that now I think is cognitively even occurring to a lot of the folks who are really passionate about these causes.
So for me, a UN agency 7 years ago told me that I cannot mention LGBTIQ issues in an official document. And I remember that critically. And now, seven years later, same agencies are super powerful, speaking about LGBTIQ rights, trying to support it. So there's definitely progress. We can see it, the words are there, but the actions are not still catching up. We want to see really programmatic work within the UN as well that address specifically LGBTIQ issues. We want to see really in the SDG follow-up official review process that really opened up to civil society and LGBTIQ organizations. We want to see that insight really integrated within what we want to achieve. With excluding LGBTIQ rights, we're really setting up ourselves for failure to achieve the SDGs. So we need to really integrate that within it. And we need
go ahead.
Sorry, yes. No, and we need really to support the grassroots organizations that are fighting on the ground. The laws, as Ambin mentioned, their impact.
Because it seems like that's what's changing the mindset. The conversation changes behind our attitudes. Thank you so much, Martin. Next, I want to go to Kekenya Ntaya, who's the founder and president of Kekenya's Dream and came from our In Conversation, Creating Change. Kekenya, our question for you is, which specific changes would you like to see in your home community as well as globally within the next few years?
I think from the question you asked the audience, and I think the biggest was the social norm, change of social norm. Mm-hmm. I think that's a huge undertaking that I think all of us need to really focus on it. And I think the biggest thing is that we need to be patient and we need to have a long-term investment. I'm surprised that financing did not come into that, because there's lack of financing on women or cross education or just generally gender equality space, and when it is there, it's only limited to the top-notch, organizations or up there. And then, as I think Martin has just talked about, investing in local grassroots movement is really the way to go. So I think if we can shift our mindset and move beyond the old systems of development, and really focus on the bottom up, and that is focusing on the organizations in the grassroots that are in the forefront, that are solving the issues on their own down there. So we need to really focus on that. So I think that those are the major things. It's like really a mind shift of how we do things. The old system has failed us. We need to really embrace the new one, which is supporting the local organizations on the ground.
And take complete ownership of it, because as we've heard, that makes a difference. I want to come now to Hita El-Khiari, who is head of the Secretariat at Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund, and came from our In Conversation, Building Sustainable Peace. Hita, this question comes from Christina in Austria, and thanks to all our question askers who included their name and location. Do you think countries with strong female leadership are more peaceful because women are naturally more empathetic, or do more peaceful societies tend to allow women to rise to the top because they place less value on the capacity for violence?
That's a very good question, and thank you, Christina, for asking that. It's something that comes up a lot, being a fund that works on supporting women in peace and security and humanitarian settings, we often get the question, are women by nature more peaceful? Is it why you're pushing that agenda? And obviously the answer is no. We don't believe that women by nature are more peaceful or consensual and more able to bring about peace by nature. It's more about equality and representation. Societies that are inclusive of women and societies that are also inclusive, to get back to what colleagues have been mentioning, of LGBTQI plus communities, are also societies that are less likely to fall into conflict. There has been also growing evidence on the relationship between gender equality as a human right and peaceful societies. Obviously, the societies that are more respectful of human rights, more respectful and inclusive of women, but also of minorities, including sexual minorities or ethnic minorities, are more likely to be peaceful. So basically, to answer your question, it's the latter rather. So it's societies that are more peaceful are more likely to have women at their top, because they're more inclusive and more respectful of human rights and gender equality.
So representation is the goal there. I do have to say that Christina, the question asker here, started her question with the book Power by Margaret Atwood, which actually makes exactly the point that you're saying, that women are not naturally more peaceful, but that the representation is the issue, where we're all holding each other to account. So thank you for that. And now I want to go to Karen Tignata, the executive director of the Gaston Z Ortigas Peace Institute, who was in our In Conversation Building Sustainable Peace. So for you, Karen, how did a feminist approach help you when you were negotiating the peace agreement?
Yes, I believe that being women, knowing particularly the situation of women on the ground and how conflict has affected them, gave us an extra push to really work for peace, which would really affect them in the communities. Also, women in the negotiations supported each other. So the head of the peace office in the Philippines, the peace advisor, helped to appoint other women in the negotiations. And they had the perspective of knowing the situation of women all over the country and different types of women, but especially women who were affected by the conflict. So although it was difficult, because sometimes their counterpart in the negotiations would say, we're not used to dealing with women, we're not used to negotiating with women. Still, they kept on. They showed that they would also know the technicalities of it's not just being there, but also knowing all the details of how normalization or demobilization or how a government would run. So having also all that technical knowledge and expertise also helped, I believe.
I love all of that, but especially the bringing women along, because there's this myth out there, right, that we're in competition with each other and with all genders. And the reality is it works so much better, as Hita pointed out too, when representation is the focus rather than competition. So we have a little bit of time, and I kind of want to open up the floor for you all to weigh in on questions that went to your fellow speakers. Some things that I would love to hear more perspective on are this idea of social media as a bad space, the question of making the SDGs more inclusive, all of these kinds of things that cut across so much of the work that you're all doing. Does anybody want to weigh in on something they heard in another answer that they're very, very excited to follow up on? Or I can call on you. Okay, then I'll take it. I'll take the baton. Anbud, go ahead, because I was actually going to come to you to ask about this question of inclusiveness in the SDGs.
Absolutely. I think inclusion is a very important topic, because I mean, we are thinking about SDGs as Sustainable Development Goals for 2030, where we all benefit from these developments, right? Where our General Secretary talks about creating more investment for developing countries. When we talk about inclusion, what does it mean? It also means accessibility. When you create a space, is it really accessible to everyone? What are the accessible needs you want to make sure that people can have their meaningful and full participation in different processes, decision-making, or even celebration. And I think over there, it's really important to get out with this perspective. Like we know like why there are more female individuals dying in accident, because these measures were made with body measures of men, or men were thought about to be the ideal, and we have to get out of that. We have to think beyond gender identities, beyond bodies, and really look into how we can take everyone and each and everyone with us and create an environment where we all feel comfortable, we all feel that we all belong, and we all feel that we can raise our hand and speak. We all can contribute. And this idea that we all have the potential, we all have the power to contribute is really important to cultivate. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I would be curious to hear from everyone or anyone who's passionate about it, what the tools are, because Kenya, you talked about systems being broken. Karen, you talked about people at the table, bringing other folks to the table. But for our audience out here, what are the tools they should be using right now to actually engage in the fight and make a difference, make a real measurable difference? Any thoughts?
I'd like to jump in here and just say, I think a lot of the time we limit the ways in which we can get involved in different in action. So it's not always about donating. I mean, obviously grassroots organizations
still
need
donate,
funding.
but
obviously, definitely. But there's so much more. You can give of your time, you can give of your platform. There's so many ways to get involved in different organizations. And I think it's only when we all take a little bit of responsibility towards, the different initiatives that have most relevance in our lives and also just in general to our world, that's when we're going to start seeing some action. So I think we really just all need to pitch in and pick up a tool and really give of ourselves, give of our time if we want to see a world better than what we're living in right now.
So introspection about what the tools actually are. Anyone else on tools before we go to one final kind of lightning round? Jump in.
I would say it's really important that we use inclusive communication. That when we talk, we take everyone in. When we think about participation, that the participation shouldn't be based upon your financial capacity, that it is ensured that despite, your financial or expendable income, that you can participate. We have to think about disability, how spaces can be accessed for diverse people with disability or not. We have to have high regards to mental health as well. We have to have high regard to diverse languages and also people who have needs to have sign language possibility or even subtitles. Today I was informed that would be wonderful in the SDG Action Zone if there were subtitles during the panel discussion. And I said I will bring it up. And I think it's also important that we create remote and also online participation as well when we are meeting all together. And I think really important is not to say that I have Black friends and I'm not racist, but really show up in demonstration for Black Lives Matter, raise a rainbow flag, wear something which represents that you are like a badge, or put on your website a statement on different issues, and really show up and show your commitment to each other and to each other's issues. And that's how we will create an inclusive society where we are there for each other.
Literally wear it on your sleeve. I love that. And I had to laugh because this whole I have Black friends or gay friends or whatever it is so retrograde in so many ways. But starting to say, how do you actually represent that? Not just when you're under attack or you feel threatened, but rather in the course of your living, how are you showing your values and living your values? I just want to quickly, and this will be a quick question around the horn, to everyone, what is a book, organization, or project advancing gender equality that our audience should definitely know about? And I'm just going to go on my screen. Kenya, you first.
Go to kenyasdream.org and learn about our work. The book is Moment to Lift by Melinda Gates. She's done a good job in terms of explaining other organizations doing great work.
Wonderful. Karen?
Well, there's a toolkit that we were part of, From Transition to Transformation. It's about transitional justice, but I think it's important to women and gender equality and peace. Talks about transitional justice in the Philippines, Colombia, and Nepal. Hope you can look it up.
Yes. Speaking of taking action, you have two things already you need to go look up or find. Anbid, what about you?
I would like to shout out to Global Queer Youth Network, where we are trying to create a space where youth, often invisible and unheard around the world, are taking part and joining in. So check out our Global Queer Youth Dialogue report and also our Together statement on our website from Global Queer Youth Network, where we met from Europe and Central Asia to write our recommendations. And like we talked about, LGBTI inclusion is actually diversity and equality for gender. So join.
It matters. Hita?
Yes, so the website is wphfund.org/1000 Women Leaders. It's our campaign that supports and amplifies the voices of our partners. And the book is actually the 600 women's organizations that we support across the world and have the power and the expertise to change their lives and the communities.
And we want to support them too. Martin?
Exactly.
I'm part of the High Level Commission on Sexual Reproductive Rights and Justice, the ICPD Plus 25. Check our report last year and look forward to the report this year, because that will be a really interesting one.
Put it on your calendar. And last but not least, Amange.
For me, I would definitely check out Blackboard Africa, my organization, the work that we do with empowering young women with leadership tools and other sort of support. And then also check out a book called Rethink. It's a collection of essays with BBC and Penguin. I have an essay in there all about the condition and the state of safety in South Africa for women.
Thank you. Well, time is definitely up. I'm going to be in trouble, but I had to let us go around the horn on that because what an amazing panel. We could keep going for hours. But thank you once again to our incredible guest speakers and to everyone watching who submitted questions. You've got one more chance to be part of the action tomorrow, so make sure you're there. Thank you so much, and I'll see you on the other side to finish this amazing day 2.